to meeting number 27 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans. Pursuant to a Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on February 1st, 2022, the committee is resuming its study of science at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. This meeting is taking place, of course, in a hybrid format, pursuant to the House Order of November 25th, 2021. As per the Directive of the Internal Economy, we're met, okay, that's everybody knows that. For those participating by video conference, when you are ready to speak, click on the icon to activate your mic, and please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. For interpretation, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. And I'll remind everyone that all comments should be addressed through the chair. I'd now like to welcome our witnesses for today. We have Eda Rousel, Fisheries Advisor with Association des Crevettes Acadiens de Gulf. From the Canadian Sport Fishing Industry Association, we have Mr. Phil Morlock, Director, Government Affairs. From the Maritime Fishermen's Union, we have Martin Mellet, Executive Director. From the Public Fishery Alliance, we have Dave Brown. From the South Vancouver Island Anglers Coalition, we have Christopher Bose, President. And from the Sport Fishing Institute of British Columbia, we have Owen Bird, Executive Director, and Martin Peiche, Director, Business Development. And from the Fédération Régionale Acadienne des Pêcheurs Professionnels, we have Jean Latang, Director General. Now, I hope I didn't massacre the names or the organizations that you're with, but we'll start off now with our witnesses for 5 minutes or less. We'll go to Mr. Morlock first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the opportunity to appear before the committee in your review of this important topic. Hopefully my 35 years of firsthand professional experience with the evolution of DFO senior staff influence, changes to policy, and dealing with multiple ministers from both sides of the aisle will be of benefit to your process. Fish and wildlife management is a scientific discipline with accepted professional standards, much like medicine, engineering, or physics. 125 years of leadership by people who fish and hunt in developing and funding successful science-based fish and wildlife conservation efforts proves the enormous value of the North American model of conservation. The model is comprised of 7 basic components, and Canada has played an essential role in its creation. The wealth of healthy and abundant fish and wildlife populations, habitat, parks, and protected areas we take for granted in Canada and the U.S. did not occur by accident. They exist today as a direct result of the successful application of the components of this model. No other continent in the world can claim anything close to this level of diversity of species or quality habitat. Commonly shared coastal and inland waters and migration routes are but a few examples why successful environmentally sustainable resource use management is common doctrine to both the United States and Canada. While some problems and challenges remain, the solutions are proven to be found within the applied principles of the North American model of conservation. Although Canadian provincial and U.S. state and federal natural resource agencies continue to apply the components of this model in policy development and application, DFO no longer does. There was a time in my experience where DFO was a leader in fishery management in the world. Outstanding professionals like Tom Bird, Dr. Terry Jerness, and Bill Otway brought a common sense approach to collaborating with stakeholders and upholding all the tenets of the North American model. Sadly, with Tom Bird's retirement, the DFO approach with policy and stakeholders changed for the worse. In fact, in my experience, the genesis for this erosion of credible science at DFO began with an end run on scientific peer review at the Canadian Wildlife Service 20 years ago. Prior to releasing any published official documents, the CWS policy was to conduct an editorial peer review by an independent group of 9 well-respected academic and government science professionals. This prevented mistakes and maintained a high standard of scientific credibility at the agency and with the public. But in 2003, without going through the independent science peer review process, CWS released to the public a 40-page document claiming to be a science-based review of the toxic impacts of lead sinkers and jigs on wildlife in Canada. This followed years of lobbying by the World Wildlife Fund to ban lead content fishing tackle in Canada. Dr. Dave Ankney of the University of Western Ontario and a member of the CWS editorial board, along with other experts, openly challenged this unprecedented compromise of scientific standard at a federal agency. Dr. Ankney said, quote, "In my 30 years as a wildlife scientist, I've seen bad science and I've seen abuse of science, but never have I seen so much bad science and abuse of science in one document. Those responsible for this disingenuous attempt to mislead Canadians should be fired, either for their scientific incompetence or their chicanery, or both." Dr. Ankney reported that he asked the CWS Director General to take action to correct this serious threat to agency credibility and professional standards. Dr. Ankney said his request was ignored, and subsequently the CWS Director General had him removed from the editorial peer review panel. Many of the conclusions and falsehoods in the document were widely challenged and discredited by other scientists, resource professionals, and the fishing industry. It drew even more attention when the National Post featured the CWS publication in an article titled "Sinking Science" during Junk Science Week in 2005. Subsequently, CWS senior bureaucrats moved into a series of senior positions at Fisheries and Oceans, where coincidentally the trend to replace credible science with alternate agendas from foreign environmental groups and their wealthy benefactors continue to present day at both agencies. When DFO and Environment Canada moved away from applying the proven success of the North American model, the negative impacts on key sport and commercial fish populations increased exponentially on both coasts, and no substantive solutions or positive results have occurred to reverse this trend. The damage to related regional and national economies has been ignored. The collaboration, integrity, and mutual respect which once defined the relationship with the relational fishing community has been undermined by DFO collusion with foreign entities bent on ending recreational fishing coast to coast to coast. Arbitrary public access closures by percentage targets with no basis in science or evidence of benefit have become official DFO policy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for that. That was just almost right on your 5-minute mark. We'll now go to Ms. Rousel for 5 minutes or less, please.
Bonjour à tous.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss the DFO science issue in the southern Gulf St. Lawrence shrimp fishery. I'm Ida Roussel, a fisheries advisor with the Acadian Regional Federation of Professional Fishers, and I'm responsible for the shrimp file. I've been working for FRAP for 30 years. As representative of the Acadian shrimpers, I attend various peer reviews and sit on the Shrimp Advisory Committee for the Estuary and Southern Gulf. Before we get to the main questions that accompanied your invitation, I think it's important to tell you who we are. ACAG is an association of Acadian shrimp captain owners based on the Acadian Peninsula. It is a member of FRAP. Our shrimp fishermen are semi-skilled groundfish fishermen who have chosen to diversify and specialize in a directed shrimp fishery. The boats are 65 feet or over and travel long distances to the fishing grounds. Our shrimpers hold individual transferable quotas. They are governed by several management measures. The fishery begins on April 1st and it ends on December 31st. We would ask the lady to please read more slowly. A research survey has been conducted annually since 1990 in the estuary and in the northern Gulf of St. Lawrence in August from a DFO vessel. It is important to note that this is a multi-species research survey and therefore not specific to shrimp. The survey is mostly done randomly, as it happens that many shrimp fishing grounds are not selected. Biomass indices are calculated using geostatistical methods. The survey makes it possible to describe...
The clerk has her hand up. I have to go see.
Just l'interprétation nous demande...
Interpretation is asking us to have you slow down a bit, please. Thank you. It allows us to... Survey makes it possible to describe the distribution of shrimp, estimate the abundance of shrimp, and learn about the population dynamics. In recent years, there's been a divergence between the fisheries indices and the DFO survey indices. This year, this was done since 2012. done with this year, the peer review science stated that CFP was not consistent with current environmental conditions and that the risk should be incorporated in the CFP now. Industry was made aware of the science paper, and this review, we were asked to incorporate it into the CFP without having a chance to analyze it and present it to our members. At the advisory committee meeting, the shrimp industry recommended following the current CFP within the exception of the Sept-Îles area. According to the CFP, the TAC should be increased, but the industry agreed that the increase should only be 15% and supported the fact that the CFP should be reviewed in the current year. However, the minister did not follow the industry recommendation and lowered the tax based on the scenarios proposed by DFO Science following its peer review document. So one has to wonder, why work on a precautionary approach when it is rejected out of hand? The peer review process is one thing, but the expertise of fishermen, their data, is another. Like scientific data, we believe that fishermen's data deserves to be taken into account. Fishermen are the eyes on the water. They are on the water from April 1st until sometimes November and even December. The survey is only there for 20 days in August. It's very obvious that the level of trust between science, DFO, and fishers is not at its best right now. Fishers feel that management and science do not have enough confidence in their data and expertise. However, they're not there to destroy the species, but during their living year after year, they're aware that the resource must be protected for the sustainability of the fishery. For the fishermen, any decisions made by DFO regarding the fishery can have an impact on their fishing enterprise. The CSAS states that technological developments in the fishery, including the use of bottom mapping, echo sounders, and new trawls, allow fishers to be more efficient today than in the past. Our fishermen say this statement is false because they've had the same trawls for over 10 years and have been using depth finders and sensors for almost 30 years. This is not new. Rockfish predation is a big impact on shrimp. DFO scientists tell us that rockfish eat over 200,000 tons of shrimp, while they qualify the biomass at 52,000 metric tons. This data does not hold water. How can rockfish eat 200,000 tons of shrimp when the biomass is only 52,000? Serious consultations need to take place regarding the impact of rockfish on shrimp. With the difficult situation this fleet is currently experiencing, it might be appropriate for DFO to collaborate financially and allow shrimpers to conduct more in-depth research on shrimp and the impact of rockfish on shrimp in collaboration with DFO Science. They could have a research survey for shrimp specifically at another time than August. It also goes without saying that commercial rockfish fishery must open, because if not, the data on consumption of shrimp by this predator are true. Will the shrimp survive, or will they suffer the same fate as cod? The mandate of the advisory committee is to advise the minister on management measures aimed at the conservation and sustainable use of the resource. It is the primary mechanism for consultation with the industry. However, the industry is not at all aware of the recommendations and or actions that are issued to the minister. There is a glaring lack of transparency here.
We're going way over the 5-minute mark.
Okay.
So we're going to have to end it there, and hopefully in questioning, anything you didn't get out will come out then. We'll now go to Mr. Mellet for 5 minutes or less. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the committee members for having us today on this very important study. The Maritime Fishermen's Union represents over 1,300 multi-species inshore fishermen in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. They are independent owner-operators living and operating their small and medium-sized enterprises in rural coastal communities. They are real people living in real communities where everybody thrives when the fisheries are healthy. It is therefore in the vested interest of organizations like ours to work together with DFO, other stakeholders, and Indigenous groups towards building and sustaining healthy fisheries for our members and their communities that depend on them. Therefore, any fisheries resource management decisions should always strongly consider what fishing organizations have to say about the science advice that is being provided to DFO management for review. but as well the socioeconomic repercussions of these decisions. More importantly, though, the proposed solutions to resource and management issues provided by fishing organizations need to be heard and strongly considered. I have 3 recommendations for the committee today, and here's number 1, collaborative science. Many organizations believe and invest readily in furthering any science that can promote better management measures and long-term sustainability for our fisheries. For us at the MFU, the creation of our own science branch, Homaris Inc., in 2002 has been a game changer and a major source of collaborative science with DFO and in the Gulf region. On top of this, though, one very important and often forgotten benefit of such collaborative science processes is that it allows fishermen leaders within our membership to understand and buy into the science-backed management measures that are needed to improve our fisheries, for example, lobster and snow crab. DFO scientists, for them, it enables to get to know and discuss with fishermen about their daily, yearly, and even generational observations and insights with regards to ecosystem patterns experienced while fishing. On many occasions, science projects were then developed to test some of these patterns with success, and on all occasions, it's been an opportunity for all parties to exchange, raise awareness on issues, and develop trust in a common science process. Where this formula has been used, we have seen success stories such as in the management of the lobster and snow crab fisheries in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence. However, with other resources such as with herring and mackerel, we are currently facing challenges where this collaboration has not been established or is limited. Recommendation number 2, adapt and properly fund DFO stock assessment science to a changing ecosystem. In the past 20 years, fishermen have been witness to a rapidly changing ecosystem associated with climate change. This phenomenon is responsible in part for a multitude of significant changes in ecology, in distribution and biomass of several species in the southern Gulf of St. Lawrence, as well as changing predation pressures. As a result, it is becoming increasingly urgent for DFO to develop a holistic research strategy aimed at better understanding and predicting the impact of these changes and adapt current DFO stock assessment protocols to changing fish ecology and distribution patterns. Finally, the DFO science sector is well recognized as having extensive expertise in a wide range of fields, as stated to this committee by the DFO Director General of Ecosystem Science Directorate, Dr. Bernard Vigneault. This includes marine environment and aquatic ecosystems, hydrography, oceanography, fisheries, aquaculture, and biotechnology. However, a socioeconomic science expertise is sorely lacking and of greater need than ever to help us better plan and adapt to these changes that are affecting our fisheries and coastal communities that depend on them. Recommendation number 3, ad hoc committees and science networks. Where there is a need for specific issues to be solved in the fisheries sector, ad hoc committees should be put in place to study the issue from all scientific angles, natural and socioeconomic, conduct regional consultations with stakeholder and indigenous groups, while also exploring outside-the-box ideas. Such committees would need to have representation from industry leaders, academia, indigenous groups, DFO science and management. As such, recommendations emanating from these committees would garner better buy-in from stakeholder groups and would be a precious advisory tool for the minister in situations where difficult decisions are needed. A look back at the defunct Fisheries Resource Conservation Council, the FRCC, for a potential model moving forward should be strongly considered. One of the purposes of the FRCC was to take important resource management recommendations based on sound scientific and stakeholder advice, which then made sense to everyone. As an example, our organization has used the 95 FRCC report on lobster conservation to convince our own membership of the merits of many conservation measures that have since been applied very successfully. Another example of a successful collaboration, and I'll be done with this, is in our sector, has been the Canadian Capture Fisheries Research Network. This network fostered new fundamental natural and social fisheries-related research with the help of industry, indigenous groups, academia, and DFO science and management. I'll look back at this model as well, and its successes by this committee is strongly recommended, and a good idea may be moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Millett. We'll now go to Mr. Brown for 5 minutes or less, please.
My name is Dave Brown. I've lived and fished in the marine and freshwater environment of BC since 1991. I've served as the chair of the Squamish to Lillooet Sport Fish Advisory Committee for over 20 years. In 2017, I received the National Recreational Fisheries Award, one of only 5 given out that year by the Fisheries Minister. I volunteer as an avid angler in the collection of sampling of DNA in the ocean, and I've aided Tenderfoot Creek Fish Hatchery with the collection of their brood stock. Today, I'm representing the Public Fishery Alliance, which is a broad-based nonprofit society consisting of almost 1,000 Canadian anglers and angling organizations, angling dependent businesses, and volunteer salmon and habitat restoration groups. Chinook salmon are the most important species to the public fishery in British Columbia, and anglers recognize the need for conservation when specific stocks are experiencing decline. Since Minister Wilkinson implemented the wide-ranging non-retention policy for Chinook in 2019 through much of the southern BC waters during the most important April to August fishing season, our public salmon fishery has been all but gutted. The Sport Fishing Advisory Board submitted a suite of very modest Chinook retention proposals in 2020 that were designed in collaboration with DFO fisheries and stock assessment staff using the most recent data. The small areas represented vital opportunities for salmon anglers and avoided migrating stocks of concern, while measures to protect declining Fraser Chinook were in place. Even though management framework model deemed the proposals as low or no risk in the spring of 2021, then Fisheries Minister Jordan rejected them. Both the Sport Fish Advisory Board and the angling community were devastated by her decision. At the time, no rationale was offered as to why the proposals were refused. Anticipating an opportunity to amend the SFAB proposals to even offer greater protection to Fraser Chinook in the hope that they would be approved for the spring of 2022.
Mr. Brown, can I ask you to pause for just a second, because I got to talk to the committee. I got to time our pause so that you won't lose any time.
Okay.
The bells are ringing for a vote in the House of Commons. Now, I don't know if people intend to go to the chamber to vote, or if they're voting from their phone, or how they're doing it. But in order for us to continue on even to the 15-minute mark of the bells, we would have to get unanimous consent to do that.
Agreed.
Mr. Chair, it's Rick. From our side, we're good with staying and continuing.
Yep.
Okay.
Until the vote.
Okay, we'll continue on with statements for as long as we can before the actual vote takes place.
Mr. Chair, would it be possible to go right up to the vote since we all have the app? We don't need 15 minutes even to get ready. So
okay, if everybody is intending, if everybody is intending to do it with the app, then we can go right up to when the 30 minutes counts down, because you won't be able to vote on the app until that point anyway. So if everybody is in agreement,
that works for us.
That's what we'll do. Okay.
Chair,
All
everybody
right,
in the room is agreed to use the app to vote and stay.
Okay, perfect. Continue on, Mr. Brown.
We were just made to learn that the DFO salmon team openly stated they would not discuss any proposals from the SFAB related to Chinook retention in April and May of 2022. It is a responsibility for DFO to work toward providing Canadian anglers sustainable fishing opportunities when they become available. Signing the 2020 Recreational Vision Statement, DFO signaled its intent to work with the Sport Fish Advisory Board in developing fisheries for the Canadian public. This apparently is not happening in the Pacific region. Prime Minister Trudeau's mandate letter to the Fisheries Minister states that the minister should work to support sustainable, stable, prosperous fisheries through continued implementation of the Modernized Fisheries Act, as well as advance consistent, sustainable, and collaborative fisheries arrangements with Indigenous and non-Indigenous fish harvesters. It seems they're once again biased personnel within the DFO Pacific region senior fisheries ministers management staff who continue to block public Chinook fishing opportunities for no valid reason. The stated rationale for these decisions is often contentious. For that reason, we fear fisheries decisions are being manipulated by the Pacific region based on politics and not science. When the Public Fishery Alliance learned DFO would not consider the amended Chinook retention proposals in 2022, several PFA members approached local Liberal members of Parliament as a way of seeking help with this important issue. Subsequently, a meeting was arranged with Senior Policy Advisor Neil McIsaac, who suggested 2 parts of the SFAB suite of the Chinook retention proposals were potentially acceptable and nearly approved in 2021. Among others, Patrick Weiler, Liberal MP from West Vancouver Sunshine Coast Sea to Sky riding, was supportive of these proposals. It seems senior DFO Pacific Region staff persuaded Minister Murray to reject them as well, and this time on the grounds of policy, not merit, citing they would not reopen the 2021-2022 Salmon Integrated Management Plan. The reason for the denial of critically important data supported fishing opportunities makes no sense. As a consequence, the crushing South Coast management actions in place since 2019 and the loss of the April and May 2022 fishing opportunities, the PFA has lost all confidence in senior Pacific region leadership. The second issue I raise with you today is the failure of DFO to mark all hatchery Chinook in the Pacific region. Right now, only 10% of Chinook are marked. The public pays for the production of hatchery fish, yet because these fish are largely unmarked, the public is denied access for them. The public deserves access for the fish they are paying to produce. DFO spent over $1 million purchasing marking trailers. With these marking trailers, up to 60,000 coho or Chinook can be marked per day, compared with doing just 10,000 manually. By marking all hatchery Chinook for selective harvest, Chinook by First Nations, recreational fishers, and commercial fishers who could identify and release wild Chinook and harvest hatchery Chinook. This would allow for much needed data to be collected with the heads of these salmons that were turned in through the Salmon Head Recovery Program. Failure to mark hatchery Chinook will significantly reduce or prevent selective fisheries and be detrimental to wild stock. Even hatchery managers will be unable to tell the difference between wild and hatchery Chinook during brood capture. What would the incentive to use selective fishing techniques if sport, First Nations, and commercial cannot tell the difference between a hatchery and a wild? The Fraser and Skeena River are being severely impacted by non-selective fishing by gill nets fisheries, where nets are used to catch all types of salmon and steelhead, leading to mortalities of these stocks of concern. The government must move to remove gill nets and use selective fishing technologies such as fish traps, which can be used to catch salmon without injuring or killing the ones you want to release. We have seen the near extinction of Chilcotin and Thompson steelhead because of gill nets and are witnessing the same impacts on the Skeena River. There needs to be urgent actions to save these populations and remove gill nets and address pinnipeds that feed on out-migrating smolts and returning adults. The British
Brown, we're going to have to end it there. We're going way over. Okay. So hopefully when the questioning is taken part, you'll be able to get the rest of it out if your statement or any thoughts. Mr. Boss, for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the Standing Committee. I have lived in Victoria, BC for the past 22 years, with its closeness to the ocean and excellent angling opportunities being significant factors in my motivation to live there. I am the Victoria Committee Chair for the Sport Fishing Advisory Board and have held positions at all levels in the process during my 19 years of involvement. I am also the past president of the Victoria Fish and Game Protective Association and served as Fisheries Committee Chair for the BC Wildlife Federation. In addition, I am currently a director of the Public Fishery Alliance. But today I appear before you as the president of South Vancouver Island Anglers Coalition. I bring forward two significant concerns. The first is the lack of sufficient support for the strategic salmon enhancement in the Pacific region. For the past 6 years, South Vancouver Island Anglers Coalition has served as the administrator and coordinating organization for an important and successful citizen-driven, volunteer-operated, community-based Chinook enhancement initiative in Souk, BC. Since its inception, the program has raised and released 3.5 million healthy Chinook smolts into the Souk Basin, all with private money. The purpose of the project is to increase the abundance of returning large adult Chinook salmon to provide additional preferred prey for the endangered southern resident killer whales at key pre-winter feeding time. Added benefits include increased natural spawners in the Souk River, First Nations food, social, and ceremonial Chinook harvest opportunities, as well as great angling for Chinook between July and early September in the Juan de Fuca Strait each year. The Souk Chinook Enhancement Initiative is eminently scalable and can easily be successful in other locations. This is especially disappointing as a historic pen program were operated at the same sites additionally when several First Nations and local stakeholders were strongly supportive and wished to collaborate on these potential programs being restarted. In essence, the department has not allowed other projects like Souk to continue. Strategic enhancement and habitat restoration are good examples of how to give endangered stocks a chance. By introducing marked selective fisheries, the public fishery can survive while endangered stocks recover. Micromanaging the public salmon fishery alone is basically optics and does not constitute a recovery plan. The salmon enhancement program in BC is held in high esteem by Canadians and has served its purpose very well over the past 40 years. It is well past time that CEP be given sufficient funds to update and improve to a world-class operation again. DFO funding should also be provided for volunteer groups and associations that seek to enhance salmon populations where fisheries will benefit all Canadians, such as the Souk Chinook Enhancement Initiative. To address the crippling challenges posed by the declining Fraser Stream-type Chinook salmon, a new hatchery should be built on the Upper Fraser too. The government has also bought and paid for 2 highly specialized automated mobile fish marking systems. As Canadian taxpayers' money supports the department's hatchery system in BC, it would make far more sense that all hatchery fish be marked to afford fishing opportunity for Canadians who pay for them. The second concern I bring to you today is the lack of access to viable Chinook salmon harvest opportunities. Chinook salmon are without doubt the most important species to saltwater anglers in BC. The vast majority fish in the ocean to catch salmon and take it home for the family table. Therefore, catch and release angling for Chinook simply does not work. This year, there is a significant abundance of Chinook salmon in the waters around South Vancouver Island, perhaps the most seen by anglers in decades. Currently, there are plentiful hatchery-marked Chinook, mostly of U.S. origin, available, but anglers cannot keep any at all as they can only practice catch and release at this time. Earlier this year, DFO fisheries managers would not entertain Chinook fishing proposals from April and May. Also, 2 extremely low-risk SFAB-supported Chinook retention proposals were also turned down by the minister. Since April 2019, when Fisheries Minister Wilkinson implemented non-retention Chinook salmon regulations for 4 key months of the year, participation in the fishery has collapsed. While on the face of it, this helps struggling Fraser Chinook stocks, this also harms many fisheries support businesses. Excessive fishing restrictions used as a loan recovery strategy have rarely ever worked. Regrettably, the Chinook regulation regime in 2019 closed an existing well-managed hybrid marked selective fishery originally implemented in 2008. That ironically still meets and exceeds the baseline criteria for a DFO-approved marked select fishery to proceed, but there is not one. The Avid Anglers program, which is the epitome of good science, is all but not working around South Vancouver Island because of these anglers are not being able to keep a fish. They are not going fishing.
Okay, Mr. Bush, we're going to have to end it there. We're going way over time. We'll now go to Mr. Page for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee. Previously, Owen and I had attempted to share our allotted time, but today we've opted to leave the opening statement to one of us, me in this case. We are both prepared to answer questions based on our different areas of expertise. The SFI is a non-profit association that represents the interests of the 250,000 licensed tidal water anglers in BC and the thousands of businesses and communities that support them. The sector produces $1.1 billion in annual sales and supports 9,000 jobs, which exist mainly in small coastal and riverside communities. The sport fishery is the single largest economic driver of all BC fisheries, although anglers harvest only 15% of the annual BC halibut catch and a similarly small portion of the salmon catch. British Columbia is unique in Canada by having a vibrant marine recreational fishery that's existed for over 100 years and is an integral part of the province's coastal economy and cultural traditions. Because of this, participants in tidal waters recreational fisheries serving as citizen scientists to generate data which informs the management of sustainable fisheries is a concept that is fully supported by the angling community. In collaboration with DFO science and stock assessment staff, the SFI plays an active role in supporting citizen science by assisting with coordinating catch monitoring and data collection initiatives, including the Avid Angler and Guide and Lodge logbook programs. Further, the SFI has created a mobile app, Fishing BC, which is standing by to allow anglers and guides to submit catch in real time, and we are also exploring the feasibility of video monitoring of guided boats. Volunteer-driven citizen science fishery sampling is a key component for DFO to assess recreational fishery impacts and to adjust fisheries to improve sustainability. As an example of the significance of these contributions, 50% of the biological samples since 2014, over 42,000 in 8 years, were collected by anglers. Given the quality and quantity of the information gathered and the versatility of the data collection approach, biosamples which include DNA, scale, and otolith samples must surely represent the future of modern stock assessment in BC. Since 2019, in areas and times where Chinook non-retention has been initiated by DFO, almost 100% of the released fish samples have come from volunteer anglers. In periods and areas where DFO doesn't have a budget for monitors on the docks, citizen science volunteers are relied upon for sampling. Without these volunteer efforts, DFO would have no basis for measuring fishery impacts or to understand the migration behavior of salmon in these areas and times. As fisheries move towards marked selective fisheries, the use of volunteers and sampling of released wild Chinook will be an increasingly important element to help determine the sustainability of the approach and to assess conservation benefits. To give a sense of participation, consider that over 600 volunteers have been actively sampling in southern BC recreational fisheries for more than 15 years. Many of these volunteers are also involved in stewardship and enhancement initiatives. These individuals are part of an army of volunteers all along the coast and rivers who generously give their time and contribute hundreds of thousands of dollars annually to stewardship activities through fundraising, fishing tournaments, and events. In recognition of the importance of these programs, DFO should ensure that appropriate levels of funding and support are provided for the volunteers and to use the data they generate to the best extent possible to inform decisions related to sustainable fisheries. The current level of support and recognition for this work is limited relative to the benefit DFO receives from the program and does not reflect the hundreds of thousands of dollars that DFO saves annually by using volunteers. There should be an understanding that DFO is making fishery-related decisions based on the best science available, or that a concise rationale is supplied when decisions reflect something else. Citizen science volunteers are typically well-versed in fishery management issues, know when their work is ignored, and should be provided a complete explanation as to why a decision does not reflect science when this occurs. The recent highly precautionary Chinook retention proposals put forward by the SFAB are a perfect example of this issue. These data-driven proposals were carefully designed to avoid stocks of concern, past DFO's evaluation processes posing minimal risk. Yet, without any formal written explanation from DFO, many of these proposals were not implemented. Finally, while it's a social science rather than a resource science, economics should play a larger role in DFO decision-making than it currently does. Recreational fishery management decisions that will result in socioeconomic impacts should include thorough impact assessments to fully understand their social, cultural, and blue economy implications. To do that, current and region-specific data is needed but does not exist. Statistics cited earlier are from 2016 and unfortunately are the most current available. Due to significant and recent changes to the recreational fisheries and therefore to the economy and social fabric of small coastal communities that depend on this activity, regular evaluation of socioeconomic values should occur. At a minimum, the National Recreational Fishing Survey or some form of similar DFO-led program previously on a 5-year cycle should resume at once. Thank you for the opportunity to provide these remarks, and we look forward to further questions.
Thank you for that. And now to finish off with opening statements, we'll go to Mr. Latang.
Yes, can you hear me? Okay. Good morning. For your information, I have been the executive director of FRAP for over 15 years. Many of you have heard me testify before this committee on several occasions. If there's any place where this makes any sense, it's within fisheries. And of course, we're going to talk about sustainable fisheries. In this context, the marine sciences play a crucial role. We will understand why. I will not flood you with statistics, but to illustrate the situation, I give you this one. From 2009 to 2019, according to the data accumulated by the PAAB from Fisheries and Oceans and StatsCan, the value of seafood exports from the 4 Atlantic provinces has increased from $2.8 billion to $5.3 billion, a phenomenal 87% increase in constant dollars, which is one of, if not the largest increase of any economic activity in the country. I've had the benefit of listening to the testimonies of the other people who have come before you. While I agree with the majority of the points that were raised, I would like to say that the fisheries industry does not know where to turn. I would like to list some of the issues that are currently on the table: the habitat, species at risk, marine protected areas, right whales, review of precautionary approaches, blue economy strategy. All this in a mess where the left arm doesn't know what the right one is doing. On top of that, you have to add climate change, market demands, traceability, and so on. In this context, what should we do? And if I understand correctly, this is the question your committee is asking. First, the status quo is no longer an option. You have many testimonies that demonstrate this. Let's take a look. We're told that redfish alone represent close to 90% of all species present in these trawl shots. This very important factor should set off alarm bells throughout the department. What's the reality? In reality, very little action has been taken. There is work being done to learn more about its diet and other things, but nothing more. However, citing this factor among others, the department has reduced the shrimp quotas in the Gulf without any support or compensation to this industry. It's obvious to us the DFO must immediately set up work teams to measure the impact of the arrival of a biomass at the height of this height in the Gulf. You don't need a PhD to understand that rockfish has effects on shrimp, not just in summer either. This raises the issue of costs related to the work. To this, we respond that we need to rethink the model. The expression "think outside the box" applies well here. In 2018, the ACPG and FRAP presented to DFO the concept of fishermen observers, which in collaboration with DFO would have made it possible to accumulate all kinds of data and information on the life of the species in the Gulf. Without having been studied in collaboration with associations and fishermen, this concept did not get the attention of DFO. We consider that this concept is even more important today than in 2018. At FRAP, our associations tell us that we must ask quickly. Some fisheries are in peril, especially those of shrimp. That we need more transparency in DFO. Decisions made on the sly with major impacts on our communities will not hold water in 2022. That inventory evaluation processes be done in more depth and with more information. That the terms of reference for the advisory committees be reviewed and improved by making DFO accountable to these same committees. That all stakeholders in the fisheries sector and its industry must be mobilized by holding major conferences in the Atlantic and Pacific, dividing the sectors into 2 parts: coastal fisheries, mid-shore and offshore fisheries. These conferences should become the Canadian forum for its fisheries and marine resources sector. They should be held on an ad hoc basis with a frequency to be determined biannual or triannual. That social and economic factors be taken into account in departmental decision-making, not just when it suits a few. In closing, in 2018, the Canadian Council of Professional Fish Harvesters was successful in obtaining funding from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, NSERC. This allowed for the creation of a pan-Canadian fisheries research network that had been in operation for 5 years. This network, under the name CFRN, brought together university researchers, fishery industry stakeholders, as well as authorities from DFO. Unfortunately, the funding was exhausted, and this beautiful project, bringing together these 3 important sectors, had to stop its activities. We recommend that DFO work with the PAAB to revive this model by incorporating the socioeconomic aspect so requested by many of us. Thank you very much for listening to me. I know many questions arise here, and we'll be pleased to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Letang. I will ask members, so we got time, I think, for one round, one 6-minute question time before the actual vote is to take place. All I will say is that when the vote is ready and people got it done, if you're on Zoom, give me a thumbs up that you've got it done. And if you're in the house, perhaps somebody can let me know that everybody has voted, because we will need 6 minutes to, not 6 minutes, I'm sorry, we will need unanimous consent to start up the FOPO study as well. So, Mr. Arnold, over to you for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses. I wish we had more time, but with 7 of you squeezed into one meeting, it's quite tight. First, I'll start with Mr. Peish and Mr. Melee. If you could, does DFO provide your organizations with info on what science the department is going to be undertaking and the eventual purpose of that science? Mr.
First. Typically, our relationship with the DFO science region of the Gulf, has been good. So we do have a good general update or feel of where the science is going year after year. But it's a relationship that depends on the science team and the actual species that are being studied. So in terms of our relationship on lobster, it's been excellent, for instance. But in terms of some of our pelagic species, it's been more of a challenge, and we're working on it as we speak.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Page.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold. My response would be similar to Mr. Mallett's, in that it really is dependent upon species and how current the issue that we're dealing with is. So DFO does have the ability to work collaboratively with us in terms of data collection in particular, like we talked about earlier, but some of the sort of more stock-specific science, I would use southern resident killer whales as a great example, is an opportunity where there isn't sufficient science there to make the appropriate decisions, and so therefore B, some of the decisions that are made are not particularly science-driven, and I would use the recent closure off the mouth of the Fraser River as a very perfect example of that.
Okay, thank you. And are you able to suggest where those science gaps need to be filled, and are those suggestions followed up, or do they hit a brick wall?
Well, we're currently trying to do that on our visit to Ottawa here on this particular trip, including the specific example that I raised with you. So the answer is yes, we are able to communicate with DFO in terms of what we feel priorities for research are. The answer is not particularly often does the advice that we offer get acted upon.
And because you're on the West Coast and possibly Mr. Brown, Mr. Boss, may be able to add in a little bit as well. How would you describe the interaction with interior First Nations and interior stakeholders that also have an interest in salmon and steelhead that must first survive the marine and coastal risks that they see? Owen? Okay.
I think I turned it off. Thanks, Mr. Arnold. I would suggest that it is it's quite variable, depending on the particular issue and discussion at hand and the First Nation. That's a challenge in consistency of communication, and certainly if it's coordinated with DFO, it's, I think, even more challenging because there's limited opportunities for First Nations and the sport fishing community sector to meet together as coordinated by DFO. So it's challenging, and I can't give you a consistent answer about how that goes.
Okay. Mr. Brown, would you have some comments on this? How is the sharing of information, the coordination between organizations on the coast and inland, how is that facilitated, and does DFO have a positive or negative effect on that?
I don't feel that DFO does incentivize or create opportunities to collaborate or communicate on these issues. I want to emphasize the biggest thing I think that all groups would like to see is the removal of gill nets from the Fraser River, which have severe impacts on both salmon and steelhead migrating back to the upper Fraser, and especially for steelhead, the Thompson-Chilcotin watershed, and a move to incentivize all fishers that are wanting to capture fish in river, would be to have fish traps. And there is that technology out there, but it's not moving quick enough. And I think that's the biggest thing that I think needs to happen.
Thank you. Back to Mr. Paish and Mr. Bird. You mentioned the data on the value of recreational fisheries is outdated. That had been regularly updated, I take it, in the past. Is that something that DFO really needs to look at, and more than just DFO, possibly finance, to see how much of an impact it has had on coastal communities and businesses in those communities?
Thank you very much for that question. It's our strong belief that, particularly due to the economic power of our fishery and its incredibly positive impacts, particularly to smaller coastal communities, that current, accurate, usable cultural impact and social impact statements should be part of the decision-making process as it relates to fishery management decisions. We've been asking for this for many, many years. And it's our understanding, our current understanding, that this sort of a shared responsibility between the provinces and the federal government. We believe that the federal government manages fisheries in British Columbia, tidal water fisheries, and therefore making informed decisions that includes cultural and social economic impacts are an important part of that process. So the answer is not enough work is being done, Mr. Arnold, and more needs to be done, and it needs to be updated.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Arnold.
That's my time. Thank you.
That's your time. We'll take a quick recess now for people to go on their gadgets or whatever way they're doing it to actually do the vote. And we'll start up again as soon as everyone lets me know in some manner that they've already submitted their vote. Once we get everybody, we'll start up again. Cormier for 6 minutes or less, please.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. But now I don't see the witnesses, yes. I don't see Mr. Lantaigne. Okay, I see them. Thank you. So, thank you for being there, everyone. I hope Mr. Lantaigne and Ms. Roussel hear me properly. I'll start with you. I only have 6 minutes. I don't have so many questions. But Mr. Lantaigne, Ms. Roussel, we often have an opportunity to speak to one another, and I want to talk about shrimp. Because as you know, it has been very difficult in the past couple of years. I'll start with you, Mr. Lantaigne. I asked this question to many witnesses since the beginning of this study. The figures that the department put forth about the number of shrimp eaten by the rockfish. We're talking about 200,000 tons, a biomass of about 54,000 tons in the Gulf. How do you interpret these figures, Mr. Lantaigne? Well, like everyone else, we do the math and see that it doesn't work. It indicates that something has to be addressed. And that's what I said in my presentation. There's not enough analysis, there's not enough information that confirms what's going on. However, what's very clear is that there's an awful lot of rockfish in the Gulf, and we think we're seeing new age classes that is happening, especially in Newfoundland. So we have to get more data. The only scientific information we have is from August, and that's not sufficient. You have a few fishermen who are doing exploratory fisheries on rockfish. I think that on every outing, the quota, if I can put it that way, is taken. If we're talking about 221,000 tons this year, we can probably conclude that next year, if we multiply this by 30%, it'll be 300,000 tons. What do we do then, Mr. Lantaigne? It's all very nice to say we're doing this to protect the shrimp, but at some point, we won't have a healthy biomass. Well, exactly. The rockfish the fishery has to begin as soon as possible. The answer we get from the department is that there is no commercial size for the nets. We have to open up the fishery and see what we can do with this. As we understand, you can't make fish flour out of it, but we have to do something. We have to start a commercial fishery as soon as possible. That's the first thing has to be done on that side. Now, with regard to, we have to be able to see the distribution in the Gulf and continue the analyses. DFO tells us that the closer they get to adulthood, the less shrimp they eat. We don't have that information yet, but that's the kind of information and scientific work that has to be done. Okay, fine. Now, yesterday or the day before, I saw that Quebec fishermen had decided to stay at the wharf, given the price they were given by the market body. Have your fishermen taken a decision? Will they go out anyway? Or is it something that they'll probably think about again before they engage expenses that are very high, as you know, and not come into their money? Well, in order to protect market access, the producers back home asked our fishermen to make an additional effort. They decided to do about 3 sea voyages, and if they could come into their money with those outings, they will. Otherwise, they'll probably stay at the wharf. And the first experiments have not been good. No, nobody had a good fishing trip. It doesn't augur well. I had so many questions. That precautionary approach that was taken, could you explain why you're not in agreement with the way this was done about the quotas this year? Well, we have a precautionary approach. What happened this year is the DFO simply disregarded that precautionary approach, threw it in the garbage and said, we're going to do something else. That doesn't work. We got rules or we don't. When the police doesn't respect its own rules, things don't go well. And that's exactly what happened to this year with the DFO, where you get into a mechanism, we're told to make decisions, but when the time comes to respect them, something else is done. We say it can't work. In your comments, I think we pretty much all think this. We know the resource has to be protected. We know we have to make sure that it's healthy for future generations. But do you sometimes think that there's not enough consideration given to the impact on our communities when it comes time to making decisions, when it comes to quotas or other aspects of fisheries management? Do you think that that's something that is not taken into account, this impact on the community? Yes. I think what could be said is quite often, I think the majority of the time, the department does not act. It reacts to situations. In 2011, when fishermen started to bring back what they called peanuts, because they were 3 centimeters long, right away, this should have raised a red flag in the department and say there's something wrong here. We really have to analyze what's going on. That's not the case. So things drag on, and then when you're faced with a wall, you start to say, well, what are we going to do? Well, very often what you can do is shut down the fishery, and that's not really a solution.
Mr. Cormier, we'll now go to, I believe, Monsieur Désolé is in for Madame Debienne today for 6 minutes.
For 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a novice on this committee. I'm learning a lot, but I'm surprised and somewhat unbalanced by what I'm hearing. It's upsetting. I have a question for Mr. Lantaigne. Do you think that the DFO is sufficiently consulting your organization, the other fishery organizations, or the networks of scientific collaboration so that they can make logical decisions? In my opinion, dialogue with the department is not negative. We talk to these people and we can have discussions with them, but after that, the door is shut. What happens after, behind that closed door, we don't know. And often we have to insist, we have to knock on the door often. It's very difficult to really find out what went on afterward. We implemented a working group on shrimp in 2017, 2018, and we had excellent meetings with these people, but nothing more. It's as if you're talking to someone and then they go home and analyze all this and will give you an answer later. So there's a lack of transparency that's obvious, that doesn't make sense, especially in a context where we see the impact it has on the communities. There are thousands of workers that are involved here, and the shrimp fishery is probably going to drown this time. That's a perfect example of the lack of transparency. Mr. Lantaigne, if I summarize what you have to say, the department is listening to you but doesn't hear you. Yes, exactly. Okay. I have a question for Mr. Mallet. What do you think of the analysis capacity from a socioeconomic standpoint at DFO? Wouldn't it be better if the department had economics and social science researchers to take into account the socioeconomic profiles of these regions and small communities especially. Thank you, Mr. Desilliers. It's very important to really invest significant investments in that area because, as I mentioned at the outset, we have more and more risk factors for our fishery, be it on the west coast or east coast. That means that in the next 10, 15 years, with the changes we're seeing in the ecosystems and what's going on with redfish and the shrimp, there's a whole flotilla here that's affected right now. And if we had a strong department when it comes to socioeconomics, we could know several years in advance what are the best solutions in cooperation with associations like mine or Mr. Lantang's. We're there to work in cooperation. We're not there to be enemies with the department. We want to be partners. Inaudible. When there's been cooperation in the PACs, it was very positive, I think, when it comes to the stock management for lobster and crab, if I'm not mistaken, in the southern Gulf. However, we're seeing problems with herring and mackerel. Has that collaboration been established? Why isn't it working? Where's the bug, in your opinion? Well, I gave that as examples of success, the snow crab, the lobster, where the model we managed to have with many decades of cooperation and put in place is a model that should be exported to other species, in my opinion, including herring and mackerel. I mentioned those two, but there are others. But those are two species where right now, or at least in the last 6 months, very difficult decisions were taken by the minister's office. And of course, if we had had more listening regarding the solutions proposed by people in the industry like us, we wouldn't be in a moratorium situation for the spring herring. That's all for me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Mallet.
Thank you for that. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 6 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses who are here and for all the information that you've shared. Many questions, so I'm going to get right to them. My first question I wanted to ask to Mr. Bird and Paish, who are here today from the Sport Fishing Institute of BC. Welcome. And wanted to ask a question. I know in our previous conversations there was discussion through the chair around the successes of salmon rehabilitation along the Cowichan. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more around what you feel led to this success and what we could learn from this particular example.
Yes, thank you very much for that question, Ms. Barron. It's very current. And I think the Cowichan River could be used as an example and a template for salmon recovery in British Columbia, in that it's an area where several levels of government, municipal, provincial, and federal, along with the First Nations, brought the community together in a response to a stock that was literally collapsed. And in that time period, through a variety of different initiatives, tweaking the hatchery system, dealing with habitat, dealing most importantly with water flows, which I would remind this committee are one of the most significant habitat components that salmon need. We're able to take a stock that was in 2009 at around 500 animals and bring it up to 3 times the escapement goal, over 18,000 for the last 4 years. So it is a great example. Thank you for asking the question. I would suggest that it could be considered as a template for the PSSI as a means to effectively bring communities and governments together to recover a threatened salmon population.
Thank you, Mr. Page. I know others have also pointed to the success that has occurred along the Cowichan, including Greg Taylor from the Watershed Watch. I just want to acknowledge that this is something that's coming up and being brought to my attention over and over. Another question, I know that Mr. Arnold had asked about this, but I wanted to see if you could expand a little bit around how the lack of opportunity for Chinook in southern BC is impacting the fishery, citizen science, and socioeconomic benefits to small coastal communities. Yes, thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Barron. I'll respond to that. Yeah, absolutely. It's has trickled down profound effects to the activity itself and displacing effort. The season is compressed because in these particular areas, in a large chunk of the southern coast of British Columbia, so the season is compressed. That has an effect on the stocks that are captured. It has an effect on the avid angler programs. That's the citizen science providing samples. It displaces that effort, and in some cases, I think, perhaps permanently, to other parts of the coast. And in this time where there is certainly an opportunity and an opportunity to come back from some of the impacts of COVID and restricted access, displacing that effort to other parts of the coast is quite damaging. It needs to be said that opportunity is limited at best and further reduced. And so, where there is science that indicates that fisheries can take place on stocks not of concern and that those can be avoided, it needs to be, those need to be taken advantage of. And so there are examples of which Martin referenced in his opening statements, and Dave Brown did, and Chris Boss did as well, all being familiar with southern BC coast fisheries, that science indicates that a fishery can take place, and yet we are in a position where they are not being permitted to take place, and as the opportunities and those impacts are considerable.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. I'm going to continue down the table here, and maybe I'll get to some who are virtual in the next round. But I wanted to ask if I have time, Chair. How much time do I have left? I forgot to time myself. 1 minute. I'm going to talk quickly. Mr. Mallett from Maritime Fishermen's Union, if I have that right. I wanted to ask, I appreciate your emphasis on collaborative science and how that trust is being built while that's happening. And I know one of our major concerns around stock assessments is around the lack of completed stock assessments. Groups like Oceana have identified close to 1/3 of stock assessments aren't being completed at the moment. And I'm wondering if you could talk a bit more about how this lack of data collection impacts your work, and if you run out of time, if there's anything written that you could provide to follow.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the question. I think that I'll use the example of, for example, the spring heron fishery, where we knew that from what we had in terms of science, that the stock was in a difficult situation for a few years now, and our fishermen were seeing some of the negative signs on the water, except that in the last 2, 3, 4 years, our fishermen were starting to see some positive signs. At the very micro and sometimes regional level, but this knowledge is and was not and is not taken into consideration to current science. And on top of that, by going to a straight moratorium to the fishery, well, now we've lost that fisherman platform that we had on the water that are no longer there, and so we've lost a good chunk of the actual fisheries-dependent science that we had. So we're even worse than we were in terms of the science that we had. So we've been struggling in the past few weeks now to try to put some kind of a scrap protocol together with DFO to get something going. But that's an example of where, we've really hit a wall in terms of the science, and hopefully we can turn that around.
Thank you, Ms. Barron. We'll now go to Mr. Zimmer for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all our witnesses. Really a good group today, providing us information on really what DFO's disregarding of science and how bad it's gotten. My first question to Phil Morlock. DFO once had a good relationship with the angling community where data was collected and science-based decisions were made and shared for the benefit of all. We heard from you how bad it is in your statement. With your 35 years of experience, can you speak to how well it used to work?
Yes, it was an excellent relationship. There was literally a recreational fisheries division at DFO. There was a chief appointed in that area. Bill Otway was an ombudsman between Fisheries and Oceans Canada and the recreational fishing community, extremely competent in that role. We worked cooperatively with scientific initiatives on both coasts, inland waters. I would say that in my career, the one individual who stood out the most and was respected on the North American continent in multiple roles in DFO was Tom Bird. And the relationship was always cordial, it was always professional, but it was also very cognizant of things like economy, the importance of economy. The recreational fishing industry, according to Stats Canada, is an $8.6 billion economy annually. If you ask the question, do you fish? Over 8 million Canadians would answer yes. And that was confirmed the last time in 2012 by the Federal Survey of the Importance of Nature to Canadians. And so I've seen it decline dramatically in that period to the point where there is literally no relationship any longer with the fishing industry. I represent the industry and have for its entirety since CSA was created. And so I can say that in the past decade or more, I cannot think of one single example where DFO has done something positive to the 8 million Canadians.
Thanks, Mr. Morlock. Quickly, how does the American NO or NOAA process compare with the process at DFO?
Dramatically different. The 8 coastal committees that deal with ocean coastal management of fisheries include stakeholder input and meet frequently. It's a combination of government, NGOs, scientists, and so on. Nothing like that exists in Canada. The ongoing relationship, for instance, in the 30 by 30 initiative to set aside 30% of areas as quote unquote protected. The Biden administration is very engaged with over 40 fishing, hunting, conservation organizations in the U.S. In Canada, it's all behind closed doors. We have no idea what's going on.
Thank you, Mr. Morlock. I'll go to Dave Brown. The Public Fishery Alliance was formed out of a need to get basically the attention of the Minister of DFO. The Minister promised to work with the angling community in this committee and also in Parliament. You might have watched the debate last week. At the same time that I asked if she was going to work with groups like the PFA to have an opening on Howe Sound, she assured me that she was going to look into it. Yet at the same time, it's my understanding from your notes that the DFO senior staff in the Pacific regions wouldn't even look at it. Has the minister worked with you as she promised she would? Please explain.
What I'd like to say is the minister's staff at the lower level have been very engaging, provided us with a lot of opportunity for input, looking at data and coming up with the Howe Sound Sport Fish Advisory proposal that, there was a 99+% chance you would not encounter a stock of concern. There'd be a great opportunity where in our area, Vancouver area is closed right now for Chinook salmon, the most important salmon from April 1st till August 31st, pretty much essentially. And despite these meetings, these recommendations, even, some of the minister's own staff met with us and said the proposals were sound and data driven and supported. They continually have rejected them now, despite numerous revisions, and come back to us with, reasons for some of the closures where we're not given an opportunity to input, to the point this year where the opportunity with the proposal we had would have been for April and May. They wouldn't even look at it. So we worked hard to try and get it, but it's not happening, and we're getting shut down.
Yeah. Last question, Dave. What does DFO need to do to regain the trust of the angling community?
I think they need to create opportunities specifically for Chinook salmon where there are data-driven proposals, and they need to look at the Sport Fish Advisory Board's proposals and look at them on a level where they're taken seriously and not dismissed for what appear to be either senior Pacific Region staffs, biases, or else political decisions at the ministerial level. I think the confidence right now in the senior department decision makers and the minister to do this is severely lacking, and looking at some of these proposals and adopting them in the upcoming IFMP would go a long way to doing this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. We'll now go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, my questions will be all to Mr. Maillet. 5 minutes is short. We've heard pretty extensive testimony given about the disconnect between DFO science and the fisher, the input of the information coming from the fisher, whether it's commercial fishers or indigenous fishers. So my question, and we heard the evidence from the PIFA, Martin, last week, about one area I want to focus on is the modeling used by DFO is not a transparent process. There's a question around the modeling being used. In fact, it was that same modeling that was pointed to as one of the reasons for the disconnect between the department and the cod fishery at Newfoundland that led to its collapse. So how would you comment on the modeling, how DFO uses the modeling of the science that they get and the information, and how it could be improved?
Well, I think, as I mentioned in my introduction, there was a successful committee put together a good time ago now, which was the FRCC, where after the cod collapse.
I know you commented.
I will a little bit. So the Fisheries Research and Conservation Council, after the cod moratorium, had the mandate to bring together DFO science, but also outside of DFO science, so academia and then international experts on fisheries science, but also representatives from the industry. So it became a transparent process, or at least the process strived to be 100% transparent. So the recommendations that came out from these committee meetings and reports were out for everyone to look into. And I think right now we have the CSAS process, which is looking at every year looking at the science that's being done on all of these species, and they're supposed to be improving the science as we go forward. But we're seeing some examples where for many years we've said, our organization and some of the others that presented here, that there needs to be some of the science that's adapted to the climate change things that we're seeing on the water. And for instance, mackerel, herring, we're seeing some changes in the distribution and the timing of the fish when they're around the coast. So every year, DFO science, in some instances, they have to, they rent their boats to go out and do the science every week, the same week every year. And if you miss the timing of the fish by a few days or a few weeks, that's going to impact the quality of your science, right?
Okay. When did FRCC cease to function?
Oh, I think it was in the early 2010s, if I remember, to 2012 maybe, or maybe before that.
So it was disbanded?
It was disbanded, yeah.
In 2010, 2012?
Yeah, the funding
was a model that worked very well?
Like I mentioned, in our case for the MFU, we've used the report for lobster and the report for herring as well to push some of the changes that were suggested to our own fishermen, right?
So since that period, there's been no formal structure that was similar to the FRCC?
Not that I know of.
Not okay. And again, Martin, I want to thank you for the 3 recommendations, because this committee is interested in hearing. We can dwell on the past, but I'm more interested what has to be done, what changes have to be put in place to ensure that the knowledge of the fisher, whether it's on East Coast or West Coast, is incorporated into the actual data that goes to the minister for key decisions. Would you, could you give us your opinion, give me your opinion on that? What would be the best structure? Because there was testimony given here where fisher groups had made recommendations over the years to improve conservation, especially on mackerel and herring, but it was ignored by the department. One was increasing the net mesh size to allow more to stay in the water, which would be simple conservation, but it was not accepted by the department. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been giving, in some cases, recommendations that are the same in some areas for over 20 years. For instance, with mackerel, that would have had a significant
And why
impact.
was it discounted by the department?
It's a good question. I think there's, I mean, in our case, we've been asking for a more selective gear to be used with herring and with mackerel, for instance. And I mean, the science and the recommendations that get to the minister's office, we do not see the recommendations. So if there's any, I mean, any lobbying
any
or any
gaps
political,
or misses you don't have a chance to opine on those?
I'm sorry, Mr. Morrissey, your time has gone over. We'll now go to Monsieur Desilets for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question is for Mr. Lantaigne. Mr. Lantaigne, did you witness that certain senior officials of DFO use discretionary power concerning decisions, not decisions perhaps, but that took decisions that resulted from scientific work that did not respond to the requests of the scientists? They went beyond that and decided otherwise. Yes, we have. Oh, thank you for the question, first of all. We have tangible proof of that. In 2018, if memory serves me, we debated the quota that should be allocated. And in the final analysis, the department took another decision. And after that, when we really called into question the mechanism and why that decision had been made, they backtracked and they attributed what we'd requested. So somebody somewhere had played around with the cards on the sly. So we're really far from the concept of transparency. Everyone's decrying that everywhere. So I'm to understand that the scientific aspect of the department's of DFO is not necessarily respected, not always. Is that correct? Indeed. The DFO scientific employees will always say, we did our job, we gave this to management, and it's up to them to make the decision they want. Sometimes those employees are uncomfortable, and we see that there's a differential there that exists and that shouldn't exist. What's the solution to your mind?
There's only 3 seconds left, so it's not enough time for a question or an answer. We'll now go to Ms. Barron for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to ask some of my my fellow BC coastal witnesses here today about the Pacific Salmon Strategic Initiative. We know that this initiative came into place about a year ago and that there's been minimal use of funds to date. And everybody has spoken about the importance of working alongside local communities, First Nations, and those who are on the water. And I'm wondering if any of the witnesses could confirm if they've had any consultation by DFO and what that's looked like. And perhaps I could start with Mr. Boss.
Thank you very much indeed, Ms. Barron. As far as myself involvement in the Sportfish Advisory Board, we've had a presentation to the board, and I'm sure that can be confirmed by Martin Peish, who's the chair of the board as well. but very little has been done on a local consultation basis to the angling community. And although we sit here with a very positive outlook for this, not much has been forthcoming as to how it will be rolled out.
Thank you. Mr. Brown, could you answer the same question?
I agree with sort of what Chris has. There's been a little bit of information through the SFAB, but not much has been rolled out at all.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Bird or Peish, could you respond as well, please?
Yes, thank you very much for the question. And I agree exactly with the sentiments that Mr. Brown and Mr. Boss have provided. Through the Sport Fishing Institute, we have had more consultation on the PSSI than just the SFAB has. But the challenge that we've got is it's still extremely high level. We're not getting down to the details. We were promised that 2022 would be a year of consultation and bringing stakeholder communities into the PSSI development. We have consistently asked the PSSI that we be allowed to help bake the cake rather than just pick the flavor of the icing. It's June, it's 2022. We're still feeling like we're picking the flavor of the icing.
Thank you. Again, forgot to set my timer, but I'm going to keep going until I get cut off here.
20 seconds.
Oh, 20 seconds. Oh, dear. Okay, so I wanted to ask a little bit, and perhaps I can ask Mr. Bird and Mr. Peish, because they're right next to me, perhaps to provide in written form what their experience has been around having staff on the ground from DFO to work with. Have they noticed that they've been accessible and available through their work?
Yeah, we'll have to allow that to be a written submission, Ms. Barron, unless we get another slot along the way. That's all your time. We'll now go to Mr. Small for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for Mr. Millet. This marks the 30-year closure of the Northern Cod fishery anniversary, and that was supposed to be a 3 to 5 year closure. Now mackerel's been closed, and the decision is quite contentious amongst harvesters, and the science is under question. How long has your organisation, the MFU, been lobbying DFO for harvesters to be involved in collaborative science?
We've been asking for collaborative science since the foundation of our organization back in '77, and in many cases we've had success, like I've mentioned earlier with lobster and snow crab. But in other instances, it is lacking, and it is, I think, the basis of why we have some issues today.
So, in terms of mackerel, can you please give the committee some examples of where harvesters could collaborate and add to science?
Well, in the case of mackerel and for any of the species of interest that we fish, I mean, we have thousands of boats on the water every year. For fishing mackerel or fishing lobster or fishing whatever species. So it is a very cheap platform for DFO to use if they want to go out there and gather some more information, data.
So I've had fishermen say to me personally that they could be fitted out with special sonar and sounder equipment so that they could become involved in live acoustic surveys being, submitted anytime the boat leaves the wharf.
Absolutely, and we've done some progress at that level. I would say in the last 2-3 years, we've, in terms of the sonar equipment, we've had some boats be set up to start looking at the spring herring stock, for instance. But it's almost 20 years too late, right?
So is DFO science keeping pace with the changing environment in terms of where and when the at-sea surveys are being completed for mackerel?
As of this discussion today, I think that there's a lot of goodwill within the science community in some departments within DFO, and there is an acknowledgement that the changes that we're seeing in the marine ecosystem right now are very important and moving really fast. Now the bureaucracy, I think, behind changing the way we do science and the funding that's needed to specifically look at fisheries science is lacking. And there needs to be more flexibility in terms of the timing of when some of these surveys are done, and extra science done to try to measure how to change the advisory, not the advisory, but the science protocols for stock assessment so that it can adapt to the changes in the behavior of fish. So right now we're doing science with a human calendar or schedule, whereas we should be following the fish's schedule, right?
Okay. Are ENGO groups such as Oceana gaining more seats at the decision-making table at the expense of harvester input, do you think?
Over the past 10 years, I can testify that I've seen more and more ENGOs being represented around the advisory tables in most, if not all, of our fisheries.
So do you think that these ENGOs are impacting decision-making, such as closing the mackerel and herring fisheries, and specifically, are they influencing the creation of the new stock assessment models?
Well, I mean, they are having, I mean, some input within these meetings. We know as well that they are meeting privately with the minister and her office, so what's being discussed there we do not know. However, when you look at some of these NGOs and where they're from, I mean, they're funded from international sources in some parts. Some are more local ENGOs, and we have some good collaborations with some, but in other cases, I do not believe that they have in their best interests the health of our small rural communities.
Absolutely. For Monsieur Lantin, you talked about the positive meetings that you've had, consultations in terms of advisory and setting of quotas, and you went out of the meeting with a certain feeling, but the decision that was made was completely different to the direction that you were left with when leaving the meeting. Who do you think could have altered the direction of that decision-making after those meetings and before quotas were set?
Chair, we're not hearing the answer.
No, I'm not either. You're on mute.
I'm sorry. It's my fault.
Short answer, please.
I'm sorry. Mr. Small, I would answer that you just named one of the options with NGOs around the tables, playing games that definitively we don't know exactly where it is heading. You have more and more of them around. How implicated they are with the department, we don't know about that, but that's definitively an option that we would highly suspect. Now, some other management issues that we don't know about, and it's very strange for us when we are hit with that, because we don't expect necessarily that to happen, and all of a sudden there's a ministerial change there. So what did happen? Very hard to know. So that's why we're saying that transparency has to be around those tables more and more. Advisory tables. If you look at my notes, I would did even place that in there. Most of them don't even have minutes. So what has been discussed the year before, it's not even the topics of the day. So it changed all the times. And the heads of those guys are also changing all the time.
We're going to have to cut it off there. We're going over time. We'll now go to Mr. Hanley for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and appreciate all of the witnesses' testimony. It indeed is hard to know where to begin, but I'm going to start on the West Coast, and if time allows, move to the other side. Mr. Boss, you know, and again, like Mr. Morrissey, thinking of what are the themes, you know, how to think forward, and I'm hearing about, you know, adaptation to current challenges, the need for more transparency, the need for more connection and partnership with both industry and recreational fishers, the need to integrate social science. I'm also interested in these examples of where things have really worked well. And I think, Mr. Boss, you mentioned the Chinook Enhancement Initiative. So I wonder if you can talk more about how we can elevate and use that example. What would be the steps to see how we can use that excellent example of collaboration and success into other areas, and also reflecting on Ms. Barron's comments on being involved in the Pacific salmon strategy and how we can be involved to make that ultimately a success.
Thank you very much indeed for the question, Mr. Hanley. My initial response to that is, I feel that there is a great opportunity at the individual level to reach out between the communities, both indigenous and to the different communities, business, angling, tourism, and work together to build a friendship and then work together to develop programs that work. The difficulty with the current intergovernmental discussions between indigenous people and the rest of the community is the different tiers. And we see that with salmon planning, where the Integrated Harvest Planning Committee no longer has much involvement with the First Nations because they are sitting separately with government to discuss. And I feel that this person-to-person friendship needs to be built on. I would like to see, as Mr. Page mentioned in his point regarding the PSSI, I really feel that we need to be part of building the cake, not the icing on the cake. One positive that we see is that there is round tables where everybody, including First Nations, sit at the table and make discussions on harvest or environmental. And there is round tables in the Lower Fraser area, and some are emerging on the west coast of Vancouver Island. And these are very positive steps forward. And that's the basis that I make my answer on. And it has helped us working hand in hand with the local First Nations for our soup project. We've had remarkable success with that. Thank you for the question.
Thank you very much. And in view of time, I think I want to go to Monsieur Lantaine. And you talked very well at the outset of the multiple challenges that we face and that DFO faces. And I wonder whether fundamentally you think that DFO as an organization has changed over the years, or whether it's just a matter of keeping up and adjusting a strategic approach to compete with today's multiple challenges.
Excellent questions. I would say that it did change. There's so many staff changing at the department. From one phone call to the other, you don't have a clue to who you'll be talking to. And I'll give you quite a good example of that. There's an advisory committee that has been put in place for the redfish, the new coming redfish fishery, or the return of the redfish. I think that we had 3 or 4 of those meetings. Every time it's a new head. It's somebody else that's there. Who's this guy? What's this person? What's his background? What does he think? What does she think? And it's always like that. So you kind of have to restart the story all the time to try to find out exactly what that person thinks, what she has on her mind. And because some of them do have very high influence in decisions. And so I think that there's not a policy straight somewhere that has been built and that we can build and construct around that. So it keeps changing all the times, and from one day to another, you don't know where you're going.
Thank you, Mr. Henley. We'll go to Mr. Zimmer now for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my questions will be to Mr. Boss. You've worked on countless projects to bring back viable salmon habitat and increase salmon abundance on Vancouver Island. The Souk River has benefited from your enhancement efforts to increase the natural spawning population. You have worked cooperatively with First Nations, local businesses, and the angling community to make positive change for our salmon populations. Yet we hear that rather than DFO assisting your efforts, we've seen senior management seemingly only to get in the way. How does DFO actually assist you in your organization's efforts to help increase salmon populations?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Zimmer. There are two parts to the answer to your question. The first part is that I have an extremely good working relationship with the ground level staff that work on permitting, that work on production of the fish in the hatchery, and the coordination of deliveries, et cetera, et cetera. The project that we referred to is all paid for privately, and we do pay the department for the work they're doing, but the level of help and support is great there. The second part to my answer is the fact that there are opportunities far beyond the one pilot project in the Sooke Basin. And we've already identified one where we have First Nations and all stakeholders willing to work together and funding potentially in-house. And we've seemed to be hit a roadblock with the department not wanting to work forward with it and trying to divide the First Nation and collaboration of stakeholders together and implying that they won't move forward with the project. It seems strange to me that we have a successful project in one location when it is eminently scalable and can move to other sites, and it's not supported by the department. It doesn't make any sense to me.
So I don't know if I heard you correctly, Mr. Boss. We've actually seen an increase in DFO's budget over the last 6 years by 42.3%. Does DFO actually fund your work?
The project in Sooke is 100% funded by private money. We actually pay the department for services related to delivery, raising of fish, covering of electrical costs, covering off of staff to ensure that the project meets its demands. And we would like to see an opportunity to go further, things like marking of the fish and further coded wire tags, increasing the number of fish, and we're actually being stymied with those opportunities too.
Into my next question, how could they better help in the future? And you've alluded to that, but maybe explain a little bit more.
Well, the beautiful thing about the Sooke project, it's like a blank canvas. It has great opportunity. It's proving itself to be a suitable for strategic enhancement where you get a higher rate of survival rather than simply releasing fish into a river. You get a much better return on your investment for raising them and penning them for a short period of time at the estuary. That is what we would like to do in greater number in the Sooke Basin, but also we would like to see opportunities scaling that in other locations that have already been identified, often locations where historic projects like this were in place that were closed down by the department for no apparent reason. And it seems strange that you have a successful project going on one place and it's not being looked at in other places. It appears to be a policy change or biased against the project in the management of the department.
Thank you. We see DFO use the excuse that the salmon fishery needs to be closed to feed southern resident killer whales as a tool to close key fishing areas. Is this true?
Essentially, and I have a fairly good understanding of this because we were closed from a part of the Juan de Fuca Strait for 2 years as an appeasement to people that wanted to see large areas closed to fishing during the time when the southern resident killer whales were there. And recent studies have shown that there's virtually no foraging activity at all in that. So the department has now reversed course and opened that up again. And it seems that there isn't science to support some of the actions, but there's incredible pressure to close areas. And I personally believe that the recreational fishing community has virtually no impact whatsoever on the health and well-being of the southern resident killer whales. And I cite an example that between the 1970s and the 1990s, the department own figures show that the fishing community, the public fishery for salmon was at its peak and the largest effort was taking place. At the same time, during the 20 years, the population of the southern resident killer whales went from 70 animals to 98, I believe. And that is an indication that if you've got more activity on the water from recreational fishing and a growth over that same 20-year period of southern resident killer whales, it kind of shows that that recreational fishery isn't really the cause of the current decline.
So is there a viable option?
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer.
Okay,
Thank you, Mr. Zimmer. You're gone over. We'll go to Mr. Cormier now for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just for the record, Mr. Small was saying earlier that DFO listened too much to NGO like Oceana, for example. Well, Oceana called for a shutdown of Capeland this year, and DFO didn't listen to the advice, so we went on with still a Capeland fishery. So just want to put that on the record. So of course, like I said at the beginning, I think we also have to take into account the impact that is going to have on communities when we shut down a fishery. So my question will be for Mr. Mallet now, speaking of fisheries closure. So Mr. Mallet, merci d'être avec nous.
Thank you for being with us, Mr. Mallet. We get an opportunity to talk quite often about various issues in fisheries in our regions. The spring herring fisheries has been shut down, mackerel too. We know this will have effects on some fishermen in our regions, those who depend exclusively on that particular fishery. As my colleague Bob Morrissey said earlier, we've had shutdowns such as the cod moratorium in Newfoundland. My opinion, I'll tell you in advance, is that the DFO should put in place a support program for fishermen who are strictly affected by the shutdown of the herring and mackerel fisheries. Thank you for the question, Mr. Cormier. Excellent question. Yes, indeed. There should be a support program for the industry to allow fisheries organizations to put in place some restructuring in some of those fisheries to allow for fishermen who depend on those fisheries to have some kind of financial support, or in some cases, there may be some who be ready to retire, and that would allow them to retire and allow those who decide to stay to be more profitable. Now, having said that, we saw the decision taken this winter regarding herring and mackerel. There doesn't seem to be any plan, any concrete plan for the next steps. In the case of mackerel in particular, it was a surprise for everyone. We had recommendations from the Advisory Committee on Mackerel that provided 7 options for quotas for that species. And they decided to choose the worst option on the table, a moratorium that also includes other fisheries, also it includes other kinds of fisheries that depend on certain species to fish lobster and crab. So we're worried for other fisheries regarding bait. Things are not being done right now. So 2 little things before I get to the bait. The DFO representatives were asked, okay, you shut down the herring fishery. Are there people from the department there? Yes, I think that we can interpret that answer in different ways. Have you seen public service on the water when the moratorium was called at the very beginning, as you said earlier, when there was herring there to take scientific samples? Were they there on the water? Yes, they're on the water at the time. We lose the opportunity to collect that science, though. We managed at the last minute to have a rapid program with a few fishermen to allow them to do a little bit of fishing and gather some data, but it's too little too late. I get back to the fact that you can't talk about a moratorium or complete shutdown of a fishery without having a plan and concrete discussions with the industry leaders like us. It creates chaos for everyone in the industry, and it leads to serious concerns about the survival in the long term. When it comes to bait, I know that your organization does a lot of research about synthetic bait and other things. I think everyone agrees that when you're fishing a resource just for the bait, there's some questions asked among the public, but there is bait available. We have a species, Asian carp. We've talked about it here. We're looking at many obstacles here. Can you talk to us about some of the obstacles you faced regarding that species? Could probably be used, even the redfish, as Mr. Lantang said, could be used as a bait. Could you tell us about some of the obstacles you faced regarding approval for Asian carp to be used as bait in our water?
Into the committee by email. We've gone way over, Mr. Cormier.
Oui, s'il vous plaît, si on pouvait avoir une réponse.
Yes, a written answer, please.
Yeah, I want to move on now to clue up with Monsieur Desilets and Ms. Barron. So, Monsieur Desilets, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Président.
This is Mr. Blanchette-Jonca replacing Mr. Desilets. I'd like to salute the witnesses and my colleagues here today. My first question is for Mr. Lantang. You answered a colleague's question about the regular change of staff of the DFO and the leadership of certain people that have a great influence on decisions in the department. I'd like to hear you about the policy on scientific integrity that dates back to 2019 and says the DFO and researchers and scientists have a right to express themselves on research. They're encouraged to do it with or without prior approval and without being designated as spokespersons. Could you tell us about your experience with departmental scientists being able to talk about their research? Well, that's an excellent question. What I'd answer is that, indeed, we have seen answers, we've seen changes on that issue where scientists are far more open with us. They'll tell us far more things than they used to. So that's a good thing. That approach is good. There is more transparency from these people in science. They will talk to us far more openly than they used to. Thank you, Mr. Lantang. I'd like to go on to another question. In your opinion, would it be desirable for ongoing participation by external experts, I do say external, in the scientific process at DFO? Well, just a second. Yes. The use of peers is good. We have nothing against that. However, we're not consulted at all. And I think it would be a good thing to allow the industry to be consulted when you choose peers to contribute to this. The industry also has something to say in this. We like to see people we want at the table to discuss subjects that have a direct bearing on the decisions taken by the department. So yes, peer consultation, but with consultation with the industry. So in the proposals we made today, we recommend the use of an observer fisherman. I think many have done so. A research network in parallel with universities, the industry, and the department. That way, I think that we'd see better cooperation. And lastly, what we proposed is the creation of a panel where fisheries would be discussed, the issues that we want to address would be discussed for the coming years. Thank you, Mr. Lantang. Could you tell us more about the advantages of an external consultation from a scientific viewpoint. We understand it's DFO scientists, but you're in this daily. That's your living. But you also have expertise. What could you contribute directly to the department and to the scientists who take part in all this? A lot of information, because the fisherman is a witness to action. They are the first ones who see the changes happening. I will respect the chairman's advice. Thank you, Mr. Lotang.
Thank you for that. And I want to say a big, huge thank you to all our witnesses today for their participation and sharing their knowledge on this particular topic. Thank you to our clerk and our analysts and our interpreters. And Ms. Barron, I don't know if you get your hand up.
Wait, hi, Mr. Chair, I believe you forgot me. The last round of questioning.
Okay, go for it. 2.5 minutes. I thought we were done.
Sorry, everyone.
Sorry.
We thought we were out of here. Je vais utiliser.
I will use my Fringlish to put a question to Ms. Roussel from the Acadian shrimp fishers in the Gulf. You shared with us a lot of very important information. Could you share with us today the most important thing that we should take away of all the things that you told us today? Well, with regard to shrimp, there's no doubt that we need specific research on shrimp. We have to see the effect of rockfish on shrimp. We see what happened with seals and cod. The cod's been under a moratorium for over 20 years, and our fishermen are very worried because the shrimp could have the same fate. So it's very important to have research that's specific to shrimp, because our data does not match up with the department's. Rockfish has an extremely serious effect, so this has to be a priority. We need more information about the impact of rockfish on shrimp.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Actually, I was hoping to ask Mr. Brown a little bit more around, we saw in last year's flooding that happened in British Columbia, the minister had indicated that the PSSI may be able to help in the wake of last year's flooding, but really didn't point to any specific initiatives that would be used. As climate change is getting worse and people are expecting more flooding, do you feel that DFO needs to do more to address these concerns using the through the PSSI or other funding sources?
Yeah, no, definitely a concern. And one thing I wanted to bring attention to was the devastation currently going on at Strawberry Island by Nickelman Slough as one of the more examples of the department's failure to protect critical salmon habitat. It is Chinook and Harrison sockeye rearing there. If we want salmon for our future, we need to look for these areas and fully enforce the existing habitat protection laws that are on the books. No, not directly answer your question, but with the flooding and all the impacts, to see this kind of thing happen is significant and concerning.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Barron. And now that closes up our rounds of questioning for today. And again, a big thank you to our witnesses for appearing, whether virtually or in person, and of course, sharing your knowledge with the committee as we try to do a report on this very important topic. I want to say thank you to everybody involved, the analysts, clerk, and translators, and wish everybody a good day. And we will be back on Tuesday with, again, science at DFO. See you then. Take care.
Thank you, everyone.